My name is Savannah Mercer, and I'm 30 years old. 11 years ago, 3 days before my 19th birthday, my parents canceled my party because my older sister Lacey cried that celebrating me made her feel invisible. I moved out that same night. 2 duffel bags, a coffee tin holding $1,400 in folded bills, and 1 phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me honestly and on time. What happened 1 year later at my grandmother May's 81st birthday party, held in the middle of a flower field I had planted with my own 2 hands, is the part of my family that nobody will say out loud to this day. My sister stood in that field, looked at every single thing I had built out of nothing, and came completely apart in front of 32 relatives. The fallout split our family straight down the center, and it has never once been put back together. But here is what none of them ever truly understood. I was not the one who shattered us.
I simply stopped holding the pieces together for everyone else. Welcome to Story Sentence, where women who were told their whole lives to stay small finally tell the whole story, calmly and all the way to the end. If you have ever been the one who was just fine on her own, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe right now, because you will want to be here when we get to that field. To explain the birthday, I have to explain the house I grew up in, because the house explains everything. Our family operated like a trauma ward. Whoever was bleeding the loudest received everything: the money, the attention, both parents in the room at the same time. And my sister Lacey was always bleeding the loudest. I was 8 years old when I first understood the arithmetic. My 2nd grade spring recital fell on the same evening that Lacey, who was 11, developed a stomachache that vanished completely by 9 o'clock. Nobody came to hear me sing.
My mother explained it on the drive to school the next morning, patient as a bank teller counting out someone else's deposit. "Your sister needed us, sweetheart. I'm sure you did wonderfully up there." When I was 13, I saved up for a pair of white sneakers, using my own birthday money I had specifically asked for in place of gifts. And within a single week, those shoes had become family shoes, the moment Lacey decided her own pair pinched her feet. When teachers praised my work, my mother would repackage the compliment before it ever reached the dinner table, softening it, shrinking it, redirecting it into something we did not dwell on. Dwelling was a resource in our house, and it was reserved entirely for Lacey. I want to be fair here, because fairness is the whole point of this story, and I have thought about fairness for 11 years. My parents never raised a hand to me. I was fed, I was clothed, I was driven to school. But in the Mercer house, being fine was not a feeling you were allowed to have. It was a job assignment. I was hired at 8 years old, and I never once received a day off. The one person in that house who could read the ledger clearly was my father. He would catch my eye across the wreckage of another ruined evening, the canceled plans, the redirected attention, the apologies offered to everyone except me, and he would look at me the way a man looks at weather he has no intention of walking into. The summer I turned 16, he found me weeding beds behind Grandma May's house on Clover Lane, and said completely out of nowhere, with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the garden, "19 is yours, Savannah. Whatever you want. I give you my word on it." I planted that promise deeper than anything I ever put in the ground. That was my mistake. It took 3 years to grow into the worst night of my life. You should understand my sister too, because this story is not fair to her either, just in a very different and more complicated way. Lacey was 23 that fall, 3 years older than me, and she had already enrolled and abandoned 2 separate college programs. Each exit arrived with the same packaging: a late-night phone call, a tearful crisis, our mother mobilizing like emergency services had been dispatched. Nobody in our family ever used the word failed. Lacey was not supported enough at that school. Lacey was more sensitive than other students. Every collapse was renamed until it sounded almost like a medical diagnosis, and every diagnosis arrived with a bill my parents considered an honor to pay. Here's the thing I only understood years later, when I had enough distance to see it clearly. They had built her that way. From the very beginning, Lacey was told she was fragile, so fragile was what she became. Needing things was her entire identity, the same way that not needing things had been assigned to me. We were both cast in our roles before we were old enough to audition for anything else.
The clearest picture I can give you of what our dynamic looked like in practice is the night of my regional 4-H banquet, the spring I was 17. I had won a county ribbon for a raised bed irrigation system I had designed completely on my own. It was the first thing I had ever been publicly recognized for being genuinely good at. My parents came, which surprised me in the best possible way, and then Lacey called from a parking lot somewhere, crying over a boy, and dinner ended before they handed out the awards. I rode home in the back seat with my ribbon sitting in my lap. In the kitchen that night, Lacey saw it, and her face crumpled as if I had done something deliberate and cruel. "Tonight was just awful for me," she said, looking straight at the ribbon in my hands.
And you're standing there holding a prize. It's supposed to be about what I'm going through right now. She said it the way you cite a regulation, because in our house it was one. My mother made her chamomile tea. Nobody asked to see the ribbon. I pinned it to the inside of my closet door, where anything that belonged purely to me had to live if it was going to survive. What saved me was dirt. At 15, I started spending my weekends at Callaway's nursery on the edge of Maplewood, hauling trays, washing pots, and sweeping greenhouses for Dorothy Callaway, who everyone called Dot, who was 64 years old, built like a fence post, and constitutionally incapable of flattery or false comfort. Dot paid me in actual wages, the occasional eye roll, and free advice delivered without ceremony, which is to say she paid me more than anyone ever had. By 18, I could run her entire seed room alone without asking a single question.
Every paycheck went into a savings account I had opened at Riverside Community Bank. $9,800 by that September. 3 full years of Saturdays accounted for in a passbook I kept under my mattress. One detail matters enormously here, and I need you to pay attention to it because it becomes the fault line everything cracks along. I had opened that account at 15, and the bank required an adult cosigner for anyone under 18, so the account carried my mother's name alongside mine. At 18, I asked at the bank about opening my own sole account and transferring the funds. The teller told me I would need a parent to come in and authorize the transfer. My mother smiled when I mentioned it at dinner and said, "After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time." Then she said the exact same thing in July, then again in September. I noticed. I want that on the official record. I noticed every single time. So I started quietly skimming my own harvest, cashing small personal checks at the counter, $20 here, $50 there, tucking the folded bills into an old coffee tin I kept hidden behind my winter boots in the back of my closet. By September, the tin held $1,400. I told myself I was being cautious, maybe even a little paranoid, that mothers don't require watching like storm systems. Looking back with 11 years of clarity, I wasn't being paranoid. I was simply being too slow to act on what I already knew. The rest of the money sat where it sat, because a minor cannot overrule a cosignature, and because some stubborn piece of me still wanted to believe that account was a shared garden tended by 2 people, rather than what it actually was, land held in someone else's name, worked entirely by me. The party I had planned was not extravagant by almost anyone's standards. Dinner in Grandma May's backyard on a Saturday evening. String lights woven through the oak branches, a chocolate sheet cake with cream filling from Maplewood Bakery, my name written in yellow buttercream. 16 people on folding chairs. Dot had been invited and was actually threatening to attend, which was remarkable because Dot considered social gatherings a mild form of punishment. That was the whole dream. One evening, one long table, every person's eyes pointing the same direction for once, and the direction being me. My father had promised. For 3 years, I had carried that promise around like a seed packet, checking the date on the back. 19 was also a doorway. I had been accepted into a state agricultural training program beginning in the spring term, and past that, blurry but absolutely real, was the only future I had ever truly wanted. A cut flower farm with my own name on it, my own signature on the deed, my own rose going to the fence line. Grandma May was the person who first gave that dream its shape. She grew dahlias behind her house on Clover Lane, a dark crimson variety her family had been tending since the year my father was born. Petals so deep they looked like velvet, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. That August, she walked me along her back row, pressed 2 fingers to a bloom in full open, and said, "Flowers do not apologize for taking up a bed, Savannah. Do you notice that?" I did. I noticed it the way you notice a door standing open that has always been shut. Then, 3 weeks before my birthday,
Lacey announced she had enrolled in a wellness and personal development program in Cincinnati, very exclusive, very transformative, and requiring an immediate deposit or her spot would go to someone whose family actually believed in her potential. I remember exactly where I was standing when she described it, because the kitchen went quiet in a way I had been trained since childhood to recognize. Quiet in our house was the sound of money changing direction. Lacey lasted 9 days in Cincinnati. 5 days before my birthday, a Thursday, she came home at 2 in the morning. I heard the front door. Then I heard the particular pitch of her crying, the one that meant the furniture of our entire household was about to be rearranged around it. By breakfast, the house had a new center of gravity. My mother moved through the kitchen like a triage nurse on a double shift, speaking in low murmurs into her phone. My father sat at the table and studied his coffee cup with the focus of a man examining evidence he would rather not interpret. Lacey held court in the middle of the living room couch, wrapped in the good quilt, narrating the various injustices of Cincinnati to whoever passed through. I made toast, kept my eyes down, and said nothing, which had always been my job. That evening, I heard my mother in the hallway on the phone with my Aunt Gloria, my father's sister, and her voice had its planning register, low and smooth, the one she used when a story was being cut and fitted for public presentation. I caught the phrase, "What's best for the family right now," and then the smaller phrase after it, the one that was aimed at me without my name being attached to it. Well, she has her whole life ahead of her for parties. I was standing in my room holding the stack of invitations I had hand-lettered myself, 16 envelopes with a small dahlia sketch in the corner of each one, invitations I had never actually mailed because some quiet part of me had always known better than to make it official before it was certain. I put them face down in my desk drawer and told myself the math could still resolve in my favor, that even in an emergency room, a girl only turns 19 once. The next morning, Saturday, my mother knocked on my door carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate and wearing her particular gift-wrapping voice, the warm one she used when something was about to be taken back and reframed as generosity. She sat on the edge of my bed and arranged her expression into gentle concern. "Sweetheart," she said, "about Tuesday." Tuesday. My birthday had been demoted to a day of the week. "Your father and I have talked it through carefully. With everything your sister is processing right now, a celebration would just pour salt into an open wound. She sees you having a party while her life is in pieces. Honey, it would break her." I asked what exactly it was they were proposing. "Postpone," my mother said, bright as a store coupon. "Just until Lacey is in a stronger place. We'll do something small later, just family." Later. In the Mercer house, later was where my things went to quietly die of old age. I looked at her and did something I had never done before in 19 years at that kitchen table. I asked the real question. "When exactly is my turn scheduled, Mom? I would genuinely like to see the calendar." Her face flickered once, then settled, and she said the sentence that has followed me across 11 years and every season I have ever planted through. "Oh, Savannah, please don't be dramatic about this. You've always been fine on your own." There it was, the family constitution read aloud at last, for the first time without any translation. Being fine was my contribution to the household budget. It was the tax I had been paying since I was 8 years old, so the rest of the family's ledger could balance. Behind her, in the doorway, my father appeared, and this is the part that stayed sharp in my memory long after everything else softened. He looked at me, and he knew. 19 is yours, Savannah. I give you my word. He put one hand on the doorframe, opened his mouth, drew breath, and then Lacey called from downstairs in that wet, urgent register, and the doorway was empty again. 30 seconds at the outside. That is how long it takes a 3-year promise to fold itself into something small enough to pocket. My mother squeezed my knee on her way out and said, "You'll understand it better when you have a sensitive child of your own." I sat very still after they left, listening to the house rearrange itself around my sister 1 floor below me. I did not scream and I did not beg, and if you have ever been the strong one, you already know why. Practice. What I did instead was open my laptop and pull up the balance on a savings account. Then that same evening, my phone rang, and I answered it, expecting nothing, and it was a cheerful young woman from Maplewood Bakery calling to confirm the changes someone had requested on order number 63. I told her I hadn't called in any changes. She read them to me anyway, each word arriving like a stone dropped into standing water. Same cake, same chocolate with cream filling, same size I had selected in July, same Saturday pickup time, but the inscription had been altered. My name had been removed from the order. It now read, in my mother's handwriting, as I later confirmed, "Welcome home, Lacey," with a little heart after it. There was going to be what my mother had organized as an encouragement dinner the following Saturday, 4 days after my birthday would have passed without a single candle lit for me, and the guest list I would eventually piece together overlapped almost perfectly with the one I had assembled. The same aunts, the same cousins, the same folding chairs from Uncle Ray's garage. My party had not been postponed. It had been harvested for its components and reassigned without my knowledge or consent. I thanked the bakery girl with genuine warmth because none of it was her fault, and I hung up and stood in the center of my room while something in my chest went completely quiet and absolutely level, the way a field goes quiet after the equipment has passed through and the work is simply done. People assume that decisions like the one I made next are born in fire and fury. Mine was not. Mine arrived the way a hard frost does. Clear sky, no wind, everything simply finished growing all at once. I took my 2 duffel bags down from the closet shelf. I packed my work clothes, my boots, the county ribbon from behind the closet door, and the 16 envelopes I had never sent. I reached behind my winter boots and counted the coffee tin by feel, without looking. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and made one phone call to the only adult who had ever paid me on time and on purpose without being asked twice. Dot Calloway listened to me for about 12 seconds total. "The loft above the seed room has a cot in it," she said. "It runs cold in October. $40 a month, and you will earn it before the sun comes up. Come or don't." My birthday was still 3 days away. I did not wait for it. I moved out that same night, because leaving a house you grew up in only takes about 4 minutes when you have been packing your whole life without knowing you were doing it. I came down the stairs with a bag on each shoulder and my coffee tin in my jacket pocket. My mother was at the kitchen island with her evening tea. She looked at the bags, then at my face, and chose irritation over alarm with the speed of long habit. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Savannah, don't be theatrical about this. Where exactly do you think you're going at this hour?" I told her I had an early shift in the morning, which was true, and I left the rest of the explanation on the counter beside her mug. Lacey was watching from the couch with the good quilt pulled to her chin, and for just a half a second something crossed her face that I had never seen there before, something that looked almost like envy, of the bags, of the door, of being the person who got to be the one leaving rather than the one left behind. My father followed me out to the porch without a word. He pressed a folded envelope into my jacket pocket, $60 in 5s and 10s, the cash of a man who had been quietly emptying his billfold into a drawer for weeks. "Call your grandmother on Sundays," he said. "She'll be up worrying about you." He did not say, "Don't go." We both stood in the porch light and heard him not say it. I walked the 2.5 miles to Calloway's nursery under a September sky the color of a bruised plum, a duffel on each shoulder and the coffee tin pressed against my ribs. And when I let myself into the seed room with the spare key Dot had given me 3 years earlier, the warm, living smell of soil and damp peat rose around me like someone genuinely glad I had finally arrived. The loft was drafty, exactly as advertised. I lay on the narrow cot and understood something I had been circling for years without ever finding the center of. Being fine had been the rent I paid to live in that house. That night, lying in the dark above Dot's seed room, I stopped paying it. 3 days later, I turned 19 over a grocery store cupcake with a single birthday candle jammed into the frosting that Dot had stuck there and then immediately looked embarrassed about, which was somehow the most touching gift anyone had given me in years. Then Wednesday morning, I went to Riverside Community Bank to collect 3 years of Saturdays, and that is when the teller's expression changed, in the particular way bank faces change when the screen and the customer are telling different stories. The balance on the joint account was $942. $8,800 had been withdrawn in a single transaction, approximately 3 weeks earlier, right around the time Lacey's very exclusive, very urgent Cincinnati program had needed its deposit, or her spot would go to someone whose family believed in her. Every single delay suddenly made complete sense. After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time.
My mother had not been forgetting to come in and co-sign my paperwork. She had been keeping the gate open until she was finished using the field inside it. And here is the part I need every single listener to sit with for a moment, because it matters more than almost anything else in this story.
What she did was completely legal. A joint account belongs equally to both names on the paperwork. She did not steal a single dollar as far as any law in this country is concerned. She simply spent 3 years of my Saturdays on a program my sister abandoned in 9 days. I called her from the bank parking lot. She did not pause even briefly. Family resources go where the family has a need, she said. Lacey's future was genuinely at stake, Savannah. You are young and you are healthy and capable. You will earn it back in no time at all. And then, softer, like a tip left for a server who hadn't asked for it. This is simply what families do for each other, sweetheart. I went back inside, withdrew the $942 that remained, closed the account with both hands steady on the counter, and waited until I was inside Dot's borrowed truck before I let them shake. By Sunday, my mother had already delivered her version of events to what felt like the entire population of Maplewood. I discovered this via a voicemail from Aunt Gloria that I have never fully been able to forget. "I am just so disappointed in you, honey. Your mother is absolutely heartbroken. Over a birthday party, Savannah? Really?" I did not call back to argue my case, and I want to explain exactly why, because it was not weakness and it was not defeat. My mother had been rehearsing the role of family narrator for 53 years. Stepping into her arena to dispute her version in front of her audience would have been playing an away game against a Hall of Fame competitor on her home turf. I decided that my side of the story would have to grow up out of the ground instead, somewhere nobody could talk over it or redirect it or rename it. The first Sunday of October, a mud-brown station wagon crunched into Callaway's parking lot, and my grandmother May climbed out of it, 79 years old, with her cane in her right hand and a shoebox tucked under her left arm. She looked around the seed room the way a woman inspects a fence line she is considering purchasing, then set the box on the potting bench and opened the lid. Inside, packed carefully in damp wood shavings, were dahlia tubers, knobby, ugly, miraculous-looking things, dug that very morning from the crimson row behind her house on Clover Lane. Her family had kept that particular strain alive and going since the year my father was born. "You know what these are," she said, and it was not a question. "Plant them somewhere that people will have to look at them." She patted my cheek once with a hand that felt like paper warmed by sun, said she was missing her program, and walked back to her car. I made it all the way to her tail lights before I finally came apart, and I want you to notice that particular detail, because it took a kindness to break me open. Being robbed had not managed it. Being handed something did. That fall and winter, my life compressed itself into a rhythm you could set a watch by. Callaway's nursery from 5:30 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, hauling, propagating, memorizing Dot's seed room like scripture I needed to pass an exam on. Then the dinner shift at Pearl's Dare until 10 at night, carrying the blue plate special to booths of men who tipped in quarters and unsolicited advice about life. Back in the loft, I read Dot's collection of Warren growing manuals by lamplight until the words ran together. Succession planting, cold hardiness zones, stem counts per row foot, post-harvest conditioning. I filled a spiral notebook with plans and crossed most of them out, which Dot assured me was simply the actual job description of farming. I also wrote to the state agricultural program and formally deferred my enrollment 1 year. I told them it was financial hardship, which it was, but it was also something else. Somewhere between the bank parking lot and the shoebox of tubers, my plan had changed its shape entirely. Meanwhile, across town, my $8,800 had purchased my sister a semester she never completed and a bedroom she never left. Grandma May kept me updated on Sunday evenings with the dry efficiency of a field report. "Your sister is resting. Your mother is managing things. Your father has been mowing a lawn that stopped growing 6 weeks ago." Let me stop here for a moment, because I know some of you are living this exact winter right now. This particular combination of double shifts and other people sleeping in your childhood bedroom. If you have ever worked until your hands were raw while the person who took from you rested comfortably, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and if this story is beginning to feel like it was written about your own life, Take 1 second right now and subscribe to Story Sentence, because the next part of this is where the ground finally begins to turn. Thanksgiving was approaching, and my mother has never in her living memory allowed a holiday to pass without extracting something useful from it. She called the Monday before Thanksgiving, voice warm as a covered dish. "We want you at the table, sweetheart. This silliness has gone on long enough. We are prepared to put the whole outburst behind us as a family." I asked what putting it behind us would specifically involve, because with my mother, forgiveness has always come with attached conditions and a due date. She laid them out the way you'd read a recipe aloud. I would apologize to Lacey in front of the assembled family for making my sister set back about my own feelings. I would move back into my old bedroom where they could keep a proper eye on me. I would contribute financially to the household now that I was so enthusiastic about working, and I would set aside this little gardening phase before I embarrassed myself and the family any further in this town. I was looking out the loft window at Dot's empty back field while my mother talked, 2 acres of frozen dead grass with frost on every blade, and I felt the strangest, most complete calm settle over me. "And if I say no?" I asked. Her voice dropped exactly 1 degree in temperature. "We worry constantly about your sister, Celeste," she said, using the wrong name, which told me everything about how she had been rehearsing this conversation. "Lacey is delicate. You have always been fine. Honestly, you are the one thing in this family we have genuinely never had to think about twice." There it was again, the family constitution, Article 1, read aloud for the second time. I thanked her for the invitation and said I had a commitment at the nursery on Thanksgiving morning. The silence on the line had a physical shape to it. "Then don't bother showing up at Christmas either," she said, and she hung up first. She always hung up first. I stood with the phone against my ear for a while anyway, listening to the silence on the other end, and I thought about how a silence can be louder than anything that preceded it. What I did not know that night was that it would be nearly 11 months before I heard my mother's voice again, and that by then, everything about the terrain between us would have been permanently altered. Christmas Eve arrived, and the nursery was closed, and the loft was so quiet I could hear the propane heater debating whether to keep going. I will not dress this part up, because some of you have sat in this precise chair on this precise night. I wrote my mother a Christmas card. It took me an hour and 4 complete drafts, and the final version was down to almost nothing. "Merry Christmas, Mom. I am safe. I am working. I am well." I sat with the stamp on my tongue and understood with a clarity that tasted like envelope glue that I was not actually writing to my mother. I was writing to a version of her that I had constructed in my imagination, a woman who would read it at her kitchen sink and soften, and drive over in the dark with hot chocolate and an apology. That woman did not live at my parents' address on Ridgeline Drive. I put the card in my desk drawer with the 16 unsent invitations. The collection was growing into something I did not have a name for yet. Around 8 o'clock that evening, headlights swept across the lot, and Grandma May let herself into the seed room, carrying a tin of her molasses cookies, and offering zero explanation of what exactly she had told my parents about her whereabouts. We ate them sitting next to Dot's seedling heat mats, while May inspected my spiral notebook with the focus of a field commander reviewing a battle map. Dot came in around 9, carrying something wrapped in brown butcher paper, which she set on the potting bench without ceremony. Inside was a spool of wide striped grosgrain ribbon, the heavy kind, the good kind used on market bouquets that hold their bow through a whole farmer's market morning. "For your first table," Dot said, daring me with her expression to make it into anything sentimental. I did not dare. But after they had both gone home, I stood the spool on the windowsill and looked at it in the dark, and understood exactly what it was. A bet. 2 older women had just placed a wager on a girl with less than $1,000 and a shoebox of tubers. In January, Dot raised the stakes considerably higher. The second week of January, she walked me out through the frozen backlot in our boots and her late husband's old barn coat, and made me an offer that divided my life cleanly into the fore and after. 2 acres of ground behind the main greenhouse, south-facing, with a water line already running out to an old stock trough from when the property had been a working farm. "I do not do charity," she said, before I could form a single word in response. 3 growing seasons, $900 per season. First season paid in full upfront. You provide your own labor, your own seed stock.
your own mistakes properly written down, both our signatures on a contract so that neither one of us gets sentimental about the arrangement later. $900 was nearly everything I had left after the account had been emptied, and everything remaining in the coffee tin after seed catalogs was already committed. Trellis netting, silage tarps, a used walk-behind cedar with a wobble in the left wheel that Dot's neighbor was selling for $300. I stood on the frozen ground and ran the math 3 separate times, and the math said no every time. And something underneath the math said now, not later, now. I signed at Dot's kitchen table that Friday afternoon. 2 acres, $900, and a shoebox of heirloom tubers. That was my entire inheritance, and it turned out to be exactly enough. That same week, a letter from the state agricultural program sat on my windowsill requesting confirmation of my deferred enrollment. I let the deadline pass deliberately and without regret, and I want to be honest with you that it frightened me more than leaving home had. When I left home, I had somewhere specific to walk toward. This time, I was walking off the edge of my own map entirely. 19 years old, no college, no family safety net, no backup plan. Working land I did not own under a contract with no mercy clause. But you cannot grow anything of consequence with one foot still pointed toward the exit. That February, when the ground softened just enough, I buried Grandma May's crimson tubers in trays of damp peat to coax them awake, and the first pale green shoots broke through on a morning so cold I had to chip the ice off the trough. Spring made me pay for every ounce of my confidence almost immediately. I had started ranunculus and sweet peas early, row after careful row of them, and in late April I planted out ahead of my own calendar because a 10-day forecast had smiled at me, and I wanted a head start before Mother's Day weekend, which is the first big market push of the season. Then a frost came down from Canada on a clear, windless night, the kind that does not announce its arrival or offer any warning. It simply comes and does its work. I walked the rows at dawn with my breath hanging in front of me, and $400 worth of seedlings reduced to wet brown rags, lying flat against the soil. I had known better, which is the particular cruelty of that specific kind of loss. Dot's books had told me, Dot herself had told me, standing in this same field, using these same words. I had heard the warning and gambled on the forecast anyway, because hope is a beautiful and accomplished liar. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to feel physically sick about it, sitting on an overturned bucket at the end of the ruined row, staring at what $400 and 6 weeks of work looked like after one unannounced night. Then I got my notebook and wrote down the date, the overnight low, the specific plantings lost, and the lesson, because self-pity does not compost into anything useful, but a written record does. Dot came out around 7, surveyed the full damage with both hands in her pockets, and delivered the shortest possible eulogy. Frost is not a verdict, girl. Frost is tuition. Then she went back inside. We replanted immediately. I leaned hard into the cold-tolerant varieties, zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, snapdragons, under low tunnels I had rigged from wire hoops and row cover, and I handled May's crimson dahlias in their trays like a maternity ward patient, because those were not simply flowers. Those were the only heirloom anyone had ever handed me, and I was not going to lose them to carelessness twice. By the last week of May, the field had transformed from graph paper sketches and prayer into straight green rows that Dot walked one evening and grunted at, which I had learned by then was her version of a standing ovation. And by the first Saturday of June, I had a problem I had genuinely never planned for in any version of the spiral notebook. I had buckets and buckets of cut flowers, zinnias like carnival glass, cosmos in every pink and white, snapdragons in cream and burgundy and soft yellow, bachelor's buttons so blue they looked painted. Everything was cut and conditioned and gorgeous, and I had absolutely nowhere to sell it. The Maplewood Farmers Market rented 8 feet of Saturday morning sidewalk for $15. I took the space between a beekeeper named Harold and a woman named Frances who sold goat's milk soap and held opinions about everything. I borrowed a folding card table from Dot, dressed it with the gross-grain ribbon and a chalkboard sign I had lettered at midnight, mixed bouquets $15, and I brought 30 wrapped bouquets in craft paper and was very quietly terrified of driving home with 29 of them still in the truck.
The first customer was a retired school teacher who bought 2 bouquets and told me that nobody had sold real, properly grown flowers at this market in years, and that she was coming back every single week. By 10:30, I was restocking from the buckets I had stashed under the table. By noon, I had sold completely out, $360 in a cigar box, most of it in 5s and 1s, and my face aching from holding an expression it had not had enough practice with. I will not pretend $360 is wealth. It was less than a week of double shifts at Pearl's. But every single dollar in that cigar box had been photosynthesized out of ground I had rented with my own signature and grown with my own hands. And money like that has a different weight than any other kind. Word moved through Maplewood the way word always moves through a town of that size, which is to say, immediately and with embellishment. 2 women from my mother's church congregation stopped at my stall the very next Saturday, recognized me after a moment of obvious calculation, and became extremely focused on smelling the sweet peas. And before that second market Saturday had even closed, my phone buzzed with a number I had not seen since Thanksgiving. 1 line, no greeting. "Congratulations, Savannah." A market stall. That was the entire message. And if you have ever had a mother like mine, you heard exactly the tone of it without needing me to describe it. Congratulations, pronounced in precisely the same register as, "Oh, honey." I read it twice, put the phone in the cigar box under the remaining bills, and sold the last 5 bouquets. I never answered the message. The field answered for me all summer long, and it was more articulate than I could have been. In July, a bride named Olivia stopped at my stall during a market Saturday, got tearful over a bucket of blush snapdragons, and asked if I did wedding flowers. I said yes, with the immediate, unearned confidence of someone who had never done a single wedding in her life. $850 for Leif August, a bridal bouquet, 5 arrangement jars per table, and a full arch installation. I spent 2 weeks reading everything I could find, and 1 completely sleepless night before the wedding, floating stems in every vessel Dot owned, loading the truck at 4 in the morning with a cooler I had rigged from a chest freezer and 40 pounds of bagged ice. Late August was when May's Crimson Dahlias finally opened, great fat saucers of that impossible deep red, petals so dark they seemed to pull light into themselves rather than reflect it. I built Olivia's bridal bouquet around 9 of them and held it up in the cooler light at 5:30 in the morning and felt something I had no word for yet. At the reception, the caterer was asked 3 separate times by different guests who had done the flowers. Each time she pointed across the room at me. "The Dahlia girl," she said. And something about the way she said it made it stick, the way only accidental names stick, because they fit better than anything deliberate. Olivia's mother booked her anniversary dinner centerpieces on the spot. 2 of the bridesmaids wanted cards I did not have yet, so I wrote my phone number on strips of craft paper with a florist's crown, and Dot laughed the entire drive back to the nursery. Something had shifted in the operation, and I could feel it, the way you feel a season change through a window before you have opened it. By Labor Day, the stall was no longer a stall. It was becoming something that needed a name. My best friend Regan Cole had been showing up on market Saturdays since June, first for company and gossip, then for actual wages. She was the one who found a fence board in Dot's salvage pile, sanded it smooth, painted Mercer blooms on it in buttermilk white with a borrowed brush, and screwed it to the front of the market stall one morning before I arrived, and before I could vote on whether I wanted it there. Mercer blooms. My name in paint, in public, where anyone driving past could read it. I stood looking at it, feeling more exposed than I had since the night I walked out of my parents' house with 2 duffel bags, which tells you everything you need to know about how I had been raised to think about visibility. By September, the operation had begun to genuinely resemble a business if you observed it with reasonable goodwill. 28 front porch subscription customers received a wrapped bouquet every Friday morning. Peak market Saturdays cleared between $500 and $600. Olivia's wedding photographs were circulating through every engaged woman in Maplewood County. I paid Dot for season 2 early and in cash, primarily to watch her fight down a smile, and she accepted it and told me the second trellis row was still not straight, which in Dot's language meant she was proud of me. Here is what I want you to notice about this period, though, because it is essential to everything that comes next. I still worked from the back of the stall. Regan handled the customers and the conversation. I kept my hat brim down and my hands in motion. Some habits are structural. Being looked at still felt like standing in a doorway I had not been invited through. Meanwhile, Grandma May's Sunday field reports continued to arrive. Lacey had withdrawn from an online certification course in June. My mother had stopped mentioning me at church, which May reported with particular dryness was its own kind of mention. The town was doing arithmetic that my mother no longer had the ability to stop. A girl who supposedly stormed off over a birthday cake does not typically reappear a year later with a named business, a signed field contract, and a waiting list. And then the Tuesday after Labor Day, a number I did not recognize lit up my phone, the Maplewood County Press. The first thing I told that very kind reporter was no, absolutely not, thank you. Her name was Claire Ashton, and she wrote the county press's farm and local business column. Someone at the market had tipped her off, and I had strong suspicions it was Frances from the goat soap table, who treated my life as a serialized drama she had a personal stake in. Claire wanted a profile piece. Young grower, heirloom dahlias, first-generation flower farmer, the whole story. And my mouth said, "Oh no, thank you so much," before my brain had even fully processed the question. The reflex of a girl who had been trained from early childhood to hand the microphone down the table to someone more deserving of the spotlight. I told Dot about it that evening, expecting her to agree with me, because Dot regarded media attention roughly the way she regarded fungal infections. Instead, she set her coffee mug down on the table with a deliberate click. "Girl," she said, "for over a year now, other people have been telling your story at every dinner table in this county, and you handed them the pen because keeping your head down felt like good manners." She looked at me steadily. "You hide your face, and they will keep writing your story for you indefinitely. That reporter is offering you the pen back. Take it while she's still holding it out." I called Claire back the following morning. She came on Thursday with a photographer, walked my rows for 2 full hours, and asked me questions that nobody in my family had ever once thought to ask me. Why dahlias specifically? Why flowers at all? What had the frost taught me that I couldn't have learned any other way? What did the sign mean to me personally? When the photographer began looking for a backdrop for the portrait, I did the most frightening thing I had done since a September night with 2 duffel bags on my shoulders. I did not hide behind a wall of stems or position Regan beside me as a buffer. I stood alone, centered in the crimson row, in my work apron with soil on my knuckles and dahlia pollen on my sleeve, and I looked directly into the camera lens as if I had every right in the world to be in that photograph, because I did. The story ran the following Thursday on the front page of the feature section. By noon that day, my mother had read every word of it. By that evening, so had everyone she had ever told her version to. The headline read, "The 19-year-old behind Mercer Blooms." There was the field, there was the sign in buttermilk white, there were May's crimson saucers in full September bloom, and there was me, looking at the camera like a person who understood she was entitled to be in the frame. Claire had written it clean and honest and warm. The nursery job at 15, the signed lease, the frost and what it cost, Olivia's wedding, the heirloom tubers passed down in a shoebox. She did not mention my parents anywhere in the piece, which read more loudly in Maplewood than anything she could have printed about them. The town did its arithmetic in a single sitting. Women I had never spoken to joined the subscription list with handwritten notes tucked into their payment envelopes. The church ladies who had once studiously examined the sweet peas stopped at the stall to say they always knew I had something special in me. And my mother's version of events, the tantrum, the party, the abandonment, the ingratitude, began to quietly fold, the way a fabrication folds when a photograph with a date stamp walks into the room. She called Friday morning. No greeting. "You put our private family business in the county newspaper, Savannah." I pointed out gently that the article did not mention the family at all. "Exactly," she said, and her voice was doing something I had never heard it do before, something that sounded like the structural tremor before a wall gives way. "Now everyone at the pharmacy and at church is asking Lacey what she is doing with herself these days. Do you have any understanding of what that does to her? Of course you don't. You have always been fine. You have absolutely no idea what it is like to be her." I looked out the loft window at 2 solid acres of evidence growing in straight rows to the fence line, and said, as gently as I knew how, "You're right, Mom. I don't." And then for the first time in my entire life, in 30 years of conversations in which I had never once had the last word, I hung up first. Lacey, for her part, said nothing at all. No text, no message relayed through May, no voicemail. From a family where feelings had always been broadcast at maximum volume and minimum filter, silence from Lacey was a new and unfamiliar instrument. I should have wondered harder about what it was being tuned up to play. The call from May came with a demand attached, and it was not phrased as a request. Grandma May turned 81 at the end of September, and she called me herself to deliver the invitation, which she did approximately never, telephones being in her considered opinion a passing fad that had unfortunately not yet passed. "They are planning my party," she said without preamble. "Gloria wants the church fellowship hall. Your mother wants the house where she can be in charge of everything."
A pause, during which I could hear her smiling around the edges of what she was about to say. I told both of them that I have sat in those rooms for 81 years, and I am done with them for celebrations. I want my party in your field, in the middle of something honest. I have already informed the entire family. I announced it publicly so that no one can quietly rearrange the plans later. I sat down on an overturned bucket, the coffee tin sitting on the shelf behind me, thinking about 32 members of my extended family, including 2 parents and 1 sister I had not laid eyes on in over a year, standing in the middle of everything I had built out of what they had handed me. "Grandma," I said carefully, "Mom is never going to agree to come." "She will come," May said, flat as a cast iron griddle. "Skip my 81st birthday in front of the whole family after this year? Your mother would sooner chew glass. That is precisely why I planned it this way."
She wanted truth present in the room. This woman had decided to plant it somewhere nobody could talk over it or water it down. Now, before we walk into that field together, I need to ask you something honest in the comments below. Would you have let them come? Because I stood in my rows for over an hour after that phone call, arguing with the Dahlias about it. If this were your story, the canceled party, the emptied account, the year of total silence, tell me in the comments what you would have done differently. And if you are new to Story Sentence, subscribe right now, because a canceled 19th birthday is about to find its resolution at an 81st. 1 week before the party, my mother called. She opened with logistics, as if our last conversation had never occurred, as if she had not hung up on me, as if the newspaper article and everything before it were simply weather that had passed. How many chairs would there be? Was there adequate shade? Should Gloria bring her lemon bars? And then easing it in the way you'd slip something sharp into a picnic basket, casually and without any change of tone. One small thing, sweetheart. Going forward, when people ask you about the farm, and they will ask, it would mean the world to our family if you would describe it as a family project. Because honestly, when you think about it clearly, that is what it is. You learned your values and your work ethic somewhere, after all. I actually laughed, one short syllable I could not contain. She pressed forward without acknowledging it, her voice sweetening the way it always did when the ask was the entire point of the call. We also think, and Dr. Pausen agrees with us on this, that it would be genuinely healing for Lacey to have a defined role there. Events, private parties, that kind of coordinating work. She has such a natural eye for. It does not need to be anything formal at this stage. Just if the topic comes up, you might mention that Lacey handles the events side of Mercer Blooms. She needs a real win right now, Savannah. You have accumulated so many, you can certainly share one. There it was. The emergency room billing department had simply scaled its invoices to match the size of the harvest. My canceled party, my emptied savings account, and now the ask had grown to include my name, my field, my full year of frost and pre-dawn shifts and double-checked ledgers, all to be reissued as a family project, with my sister transplanted into the narrative like a graft the body was simply expected to accept without rejection. "No, Mom," I said, and my voice was as level as the field I was standing in the middle of. "The farm is not an apology, and it is not a stage set. But you are both welcome to come on Sunday, as guests. I genuinely want you there. That is my complete offer, and it is not subject to negotiation." The silence lasted precisely 1 beat too long. "Fine," she said, lightly, pleasantly, as though we had agreed on something. I believed I had closed the door on what was coming. Looking back, I had only secured the front entrance. The party setup began Saturday morning. Regan and I hauled the long banquet tables into the center aisle between the dahlia rows, while Dot directed traffic and pretended she was not helping.
I strung lights through the fence posts and along the young maple at the gate, the same style of lights I had once planned for a backyard on Maple Street, for a party that never happened. And yes, I noticed the symmetry. And yes, I hung them anyway. We cut 200 stems of maize crimson and stood them in zinc buckets down the length of the tables. The field was at its absolute September peak, that late flush when dahlias burn at their most intense color right before the first killing frost comes, as if they understand what is coming and decide to spend everything they have left. Mid-afternoon, a familiar truck came slowly up the gravel lane. My father, alone, with 40 folding chairs borrowed from the church hall stacked in the truck bed. We had not stood face to face in over a year. He got out and looked down the full length of the crimson rose for a long, unhurried moment. "Ground drains good here," he said finally. Somebody read the land right. In my father's dialect, this was poetry. We set up the 40 chairs together over the next hour, working mostly in a comfortable silence. Twice he stopped, straightened up, half-turned toward me with his mouth already forming words, and both times he folded whatever it was back up neatly and stored it away, the way he had been doing with important things for 20 years. At the gate, getting back in the truck, he tried one more time and got as far as, "Your grandmother has never been prouder of a single thing in her life," before the rest of it went back to wherever he kept such things. He drove back toward the house where my mother was presumably ironing both the clothes and the official story for Sunday. Regan found me watching the taillights fade. "Ready for tomorrow?" she asked. "No," I said honestly. Then she said, "I'll set out the coffee urn anyway," and went back to work. The following afternoon, 32 members of my family walked up the gravel lane into my field. Every single one of them came, even her, especially her. They came in a slow caravan of sensible sedans and minivans, and I stood at the gate and watched 32 people meet my field for the first time, and felt it land on each face as they passed through. The mid-sentence going quiet, the phones rising, Uncle Dave actually removing his cap and holding it at his side. Late September had dressed the field better than any arrangement I could have manufactured. 200 crimson dahlias down the long tables, the light going the particular gold of that season, the rose burning red all the way to the fence line. Grandma May arrived like visiting royalty, took one slow ceremonial lap of the center aisle on Gloria's arm, inspecting every bucket with the eye of someone who grew the original strain, and installed herself at the head of the main table where she could supervise both the cake and the proceedings. My mother stepped out of the car in her navy church dress, and I will give her this: she never once let surprise show on her face. She moved through the setup like a co-hostess, straightening a jar here, angling a bucket there, telling Aunt Carol beside her, "Oh, we always knew Savannah had this gift in her. She gets it from my side of the family. I had a garden before the girls were born, you know." Smooth as fondant. A full year of tantrum and abandonment repaved in one afternoon into "we always knew." I let it go by without comment. The field did not need me to argue on its behalf. Lacey arrived 40 minutes after everyone else, in a dress that was too formal for folding chairs, and a hairstyle that had taken time to construct. She hugged Grandma May for the photograph that Regan was taking, accepted a glass of lemonade she did not drink, and then began drifting the perimeter of the field alone, moving slowly along the outside rows, reading everything I had built the way an auditor reads a balance sheet. I watched her stop at the gate where Regan's fence board sign hung in buttermilk white letters, Mercer Blooms, and stand in front of it completely still for longer than anyone stands in front of a sign, her lemonade glass hanging from one hand, her eyes moving over the letters as though she was reading something written underneath them. Gloria appeared at my elbow carrying a plate of her lemon bars and a look I could not immediately categorize. "You doing all right?" she asked, and it was the first question she had directed at me in over a year that was not an accusation. "Ask me at sundown," I said. Just before the toasts, I slipped out to the far row to cut a few lost stems for the cake table, and I found my mother standing alone at the very end of the crimson row, where the party sounds thinned to almost nothing, and the bees still were still-waked lanes. She had not heard me coming. She was touching one of the large saucer blooms with 2 fingers, barely, the way you would touch a sleeping child or a surface you suspected might be too hot.
and her face had gone somewhere I had never once in my life been invited to see. "We had a rose like this," she said, not quite to me, not quite to herself, behind the house on Delaney Street when I was 20. I started a whole flat of seeds that spring. Zinnias, asters, bachelor's buttons. I had a notebook with everything sketched out. I stood completely still the way you do when something wild has not yet noticed you are there. "Then your great-aunt Ellen got sick," she said, "and it was 2 full years from diagnosis to the end, and I was the one who went every day. Your grandfather couldn't manage hospitals. So it was me, every single morning before my shift and every evening after." Her fingers left the pedal. "He got the car when she passed. Everyone told him for months how strong he was going to have to be, what a hard time he'd been through. My flat of seeds dried up on the windowsill. Nobody thought to water it. Everybody was occupied telling your grandfather how much strength he was going to need to get through it. For the length of one complete breath, standing in the rows I had made with my own hands and my own signed lease and my own 3 years of Saturdays, I saw it, her whole, the exact dimensions of it. A girl with a notebook, fed through the same machine 30 years before me. My throat did something involuntary. I almost said, "I know, Mom, I see it." That is the closest we have ever come to the actual thing, and I mean in my entire shared life with this woman. Then she felt my presence behind her, and her spine reassembled itself, and the visitor left her face the way a light switches off in a farmhouse window when the last person goes to bed. "That is just life, Savannah," she said briskly, already turning toward the tables and the people and the version of herself she had been maintaining for decades. "The strong ones are the ones who carry it. That is what love requires of certain people." She walked back to the party. I stood in the row among the bees and the last warmth of the afternoon and let the silence have a moment, and then I heard a spoon ring against a glass from the direction of the head table. Grandma May stood without assistance, which she had specifically requested be noted by anyone watching, and raised her lemonade glass to the field around her. 81 years, she said, and her voice carried to the fence posts without effort. "I have had my birthdays in church halls and kitchens, and one memorable year, a hospital corridor. This is the first one I have ever had in the middle of something genuinely honest." She looked down the length of the crimson buckets on the tables. "My mother grew this dahlia. I tended it for 40 years in the ground behind my house on Clover Lane. And last October I gave the tubers to my granddaughter, because a flower of this quality and this history needs hands that will show up even through the frost. I know those hands when I see them." She looked directly at me across the tables and the gathered relatives, and her chin was doing something she could not entirely control, but her voice was not. "You called this flower by its color for 40 years because it never had a proper name of its own. Today I am giving it one, in front of witnesses, so it stays put. May's Crimson, grown by Savannah Mercer, on Savannah Mercer's farm. This field is the most honest thing this family has grown in 30 years, and I am proud to have my birthday in it." The applause rose warm and genuine and real, and 32 faces turned in my direction, and for the first time in my memory, I stood fully in the light and did not locate the exit with my eyes. And that is the precise moment my mother rose from her chair, glass raised high, smile assembled and deployed, and rode the wave of that applause like a woman sprinting for a train she almost missed. And one more wonderful piece of news while we are all here together. Her voice reached the fence posts with no difficulty. "You have all read about our Savannah in the county press." "Well, I am thrilled to tell you that Mercer Blooms is expanding into a true family venture. Lacey, honey, stand up for everyone. Lacey is going to be managing all the events and private bookings here at the farm going forward. Both our girls working together. We are just so enormously proud of both our girls." The applause that followed was uncertain in the particular way a crowd applauds when something feels misaligned, but nobody wants to be the first to say so. Down the long table, Gloria's eyes found mine and asked a question she did not have words for yet. And beside my mother, Lacey was rising slowly from her chair, lemonade glass in hand, and the glass was shaking visibly. I did not raise my voice. I have returned to this moment many hundreds of times in the years since, and I am completely certain of that, because a lifetime of practice holds even when your ears are ringing and your heartbeat is in your throat. I looked at my mother across the length of the table, 32 relatives arranged between us, and said it simply and clearly. That is not true, Mom, and it is not going to be. The uncertain applause stopped. My mother's smile held its position with visible effort, and something behind it began working extremely hard, and she opened her mouth to smooth it over the way she had smoothed over everything for 53 years, faster than anyone in the open field. She almost got there. Then Lacey's lemonade glass hit the table, and my sister made a sound I had never heard from her in 23 years of sharing a family, a laugh with the floor torn completely out of it. "Of course it's not true," she said, too loud, and then louder, her voice climbing into a register that stopped even the bees working the late rows. "Nothing about any of us has been true for years." She turned toward the assembled relatives with her arms wide, everything she had been holding, folded, and pressed and stored for months, suddenly moving at once. "You want to applaud the girls? You want to hear about the girls?" She canceled her 19th birthday because I cried. They canceled her party. They kept the cake. They changed the name on it to mine. My name. I ate that birthday cake in our kitchen 4 days after her birthday passed, without a single person lighting a candle for her. Her voice had gone to somewhere raw and unfamiliar, and the relatives were absolutely motionless. And the money. Someone in this family should know about the money. They took her savings account, $8,800, her wages, 3 years of her Saturdays, and they transferred it into my enrollment deposit for a program in Cincinnati that I walked away from in 9 days, because that is what I do with everything that anyone invests in me. I do not keep it. I cannot keep it. Mom was on her feet with her name in that emergency register, that particular frequency she had perfected over decades. "Lacey, sweetheart, you are not well right now. You need to sit down and have some water." And Lacey turned toward her with one arm flung wide, in a motion she clearly had not planned, and her hand connected with the zinc bucket standing at the corner of the head table. It went over with the particular slow inevitability of a disaster that cannot be stopped once it begins. Water sheeted across the white linen. 24 stems of maize crimson spilled and rolled across the September grass, red on green, in front of the entire assembled family. In the ocean of silence that followed, Gloria stood up from her chair, white to her hairline, and looked at my mother with an expression I will never forget. "You told me," she said, carefully and clearly, "that she left over a party." What I remember most precisely about the next 60 seconds is the quiet. A full field of people not breathing, not moving. Dot standing by the coffee urn with her arms crossed, watching my mother the way she would watch a hawk over a henhouse. Lacey with her face in both hands, smaller than I had ever seen her, emptied. And my mother on her knees in the September grass in her navy church dress, gathering fallen dahlias one by one into her arms, because her hands required a task while everything she had constructed over the past year recalculated itself in front of 32 witnesses. Then she looked up at me, and she said it quietly, just for the two of us, while the entire field held still behind me. "Fix this, Savannah." Her eyes were wet and absolutely steady. "You can still fix this right now. Tell them the party was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Tell them we supported you in starting this farm. We are your parents." It is not even really a lie when you consider everything we gave you. Give Lacey the events role. That is the only thing I am asking. And this goes back together, all of it. And you come home. Sunday dinners, your room, your family. You can finally come home, sweetheart. And here is the part I need every person listening to understand completely, because it is the most important thing I have said in this entire story. I wanted it. I am 30 years old, and I can say that plainly and without any shame. Every cell in my body that had ever been 8 years old wanted what she was offering, because it was the thing itself at last, the actual prize held out in the open air, my mother asking me to come home. All I had to do to claim it was pay the price. Same currency as it had always been. Make the truth smaller, hand the story over, share the name on the sign, disappear from my own table one final time. I looked at her kneeling in the grass with my grandmother's flowers in her arms. I heard the field full of people behind me who were, for the first time, finally seeing. "You're right, Mom," I said, and my voice came out level as a row of fresh transplants standing in good soil. "I have always been fine on my own. You made absolutely certain I had all the practice I would ever need for it." Her arms tightened around the stems. "But I am not buying my seat back at this table, not with the truth, and not with the farm, and not with myself. You are both welcome here any Sunday you choose to come, as guests who are genuinely wanted. That is everything I have to offer, and it does not go on sale, and it does not get negotiated." My mother rose slowly from the grass, still cradling the dahlias, and for one suspended second I thought, even standing in the field I had built, I still thought.
Then she laid the flowers on the table like someone setting down evidence they have decided not to contest, took Lacey by the hand, and walked out of my field without once looking back. She has not looked back since. The party did not end so much as it exhaled. May announced to no one specifically that it was the finest birthday she had experienced in 81 years, and she would thank everyone not to argue the point. And somehow that gave all 30 remaining people permission to stay for another hour at least. Gloria kept the cake with hands that were not quite steady, and kept looking at me with the expression of a woman rereading a letter she had filed in the wrong drawer for a year. But my father stood at the gate for a long time after my mother's car had gone. He had arrived with Uncle Dave, I realized later, and had arranged it that way deliberately. When I brought him his jacket, he turned his cap around in his hands like a steering wheel he was figuring out.
"I should have said something the night of your party," he said to the gravel lane. "I have been saying nothing for 20 years, Savannah. I have come to understand that it is the loudest thing I have ever done in my life." I told him, "I know, Dad." Not, "It is okay." I was completely finished saying that one. Just, "I know." He nodded and climbed into Dave's truck and went back to the house he had chosen every morning of his adult life, because he was who he was, and he had built his fence too high to see over comfortably. But that November, letters began arriving in my mailbox, one a month, his handwriting like barbed wire pressed into the paper, 4 lines at a time. Saw dahlia arrangements at the feed store calendar. Thought of you in your field. Ground froze hard early this year. I hope you got everything in. Dad. I kept every one of them.
When the last taillights had gone and the gate was quiet, Dot and Regan stacked the folding chairs, while May held court over the remaining cake, and I walked out alone to the very end of the crimson row, with the evening coming in blue and cold around me. One stem lay snapped where the bucket had tipped over. I picked it up and stood in the dark field that was mine, that I had rented with my own signature and tended with my own hands through 1 killing frost and 3 seasons of pre-dawn starts. And I finally understood the last piece, the one I had been circling all year without being able to land on it. I had stopped paying the old rent 11 months ago, but I had kept waiting, in some unexamined part of myself, for the landlord to drive past and see the garden and want me back on different terms. That was over now. It had walked out of the gate on its own 2 feet and laid the flowers down.
May's voice carried to me from the head table, directing Regan to bring the broken stem inside immediately. "Cut flowers are not dead flowers," she called across the dark field. "Someone bring that one in and put it in water on the windowsill." Here is where it all settled, in the plain arithmetic of the time that came after. The family did crack exactly the way the town still talks about it. Gloria came to the farm the following weekend with her lemon bars and a written apology she had drafted longhand, so she would not lose her nerve or her place, and she read it to me at the potting bench, while Dot very pointedly did not listen from the seed room. Sunday dinners moved to Grandma May's kitchen on Clover Lane. May, Gloria, Regan most weeks, me arriving smelling of eucalyptus and cold storage. Nobody at that table has ever once asked me to make myself smaller to fit the available space.
My mother held on to a revised version for a while. Lacey had been overwhelmed by emotion. Savannah was going through something. You know how it is with these creative types. But a story requires an audience willing to believe it, and hers kept quietly transferring their attention to the other side of the situation. She still lives 2 miles up Ridgeline Drive. We have not spoken since she walked out of the field with my grandmother's flowers in her arms, And I have made my genuine peace with the strong probability that we never will, because peace was being offered only at a price I no longer pay. My father writes his 4 lines a month and slips a 20 into the Christmas envelope like contraband, and loves me in the way a man loves from inside a fence he spent his whole life building around himself. I have stopped scoring it. It is what he has, and it is real, and I receive it for what it is. And Lacey.
One night that winter, past midnight, my phone lit up with the first words my sister had sent me in over a year. The flowers were beautiful. That was the complete message. No apology preceding it, no follow-up after. And when I passed her in the parking lot of the hardware store in March, she looked at the ground and kept walking. I heard from May that she had moved to a shared house in Columbus with a roommate she had met through a gardening forum, of all the circles this story could have made, and that she had taken a part-time job at nursery on the east side. I never answered the text. I have never deleted it. Some seeds you simply leave in the packet and check again when the next season turns. The farm went on being a farm, which is the quiet daily miracle of farms everywhere. Season 3 sold out its subscription roster by the second week of April. May's Crimson went in the ground in May, 320 tubers strong. Every one descended from a shoebox.
And in June, a girl named Priya started showing up at the gate. 15 years old, 4-H member, all sharp elbows and careful silence. The kind of kid who earns ribbons that nobody drives to see accepted on her behalf. Her mother needed her to be convenient, and Priya was working very hard to oblige. And I recognized the particular posture of that accommodation within about 45 seconds of meeting her. I pay Priya in actual wages. I require her to invoice me out loud, looking directly at me, stating the hours and the rate with no apology attached to the number. The first morning she managed it without flinching or qualifying the amount. I gave her a raise on the spot and told her it was policy. Last month, Priya entered a county young growers competition with a succession planting plan she had developed herself using my old spiral notebook as a reference, and she won the regional division. She called me from the parking lot of the fairgrounds at 7 in the morning, voice shaking, and I sat on the overturned bucket at the end of the crimson row and listened to her tell me about it for 20 full minutes without once saying anything, except, keep going, tell me everything. And then 2 weeks ago, I watched her position herself in the doorway of the cooler, hands on her hips, redirecting a customer's child away from the conditioning buckets, with absolute matter-of-fact authority, taking up her entire portion of the entrance without apology or hesitation. I had to excuse myself and go stand in the walk-in cooler for a few minutes with the door closed. If you're asking me which crop I am most proud of across 4 seasons of this farm, it is not the dahlias, though I love them completely. It is that girl learning 3 years earlier than I did that she is allowed to send an invoice for what she gives, and that anyone who only values her when she is invisible is not family.
They are simply a landlord with her childhood photographs on their walls. If there is one thing I would carve into a fence board and nail where every fine on her own girl in the world could read it on her way to somewhere she belongs, it would be this. Love that you have to earn by disappearing is not love, it is rent. And the day you stop paying it, you finally find out who was family and who was only ever collecting the check. That is my whole story. A canceled cake, a shoebox of heirloom tubers, 2 acres under a signed lease, and 1 name in buttermilk white paint on a fence board I did not hang myself, but learned to stand in front of anyway. If you have ever been the strong one at your family's table, I hope you plant something of your own this year and stand in the middle of it where it can be seen. Tell me in the comments what you would have said in that field. And if this story stayed with you, please subscribe to Story Sentence right now, because every week another woman tells the whole truth, calmly and completely, all the way to the end. And you will want to be here for every one of them. Like this video, leave your thoughts below, and I will see you in the next one.